James Rowland was a man built on discipline. For most of his life, he had worn a uniform that demanded perfection: straight lines, sharp turns, and a heart steady as stone. He had served for years as one of the elite tomb guards at Arlington National Cemetery. Day after day, in heat, snow, and pouring rain, he guarded the tomb of the unknown soldier with flawless precision. His posture, his movements, his silence, all spoke of deep respect and unbreakable commitment. When he retired from the Army, Chicago seemed like a new start. It was noisy, alive, and full of opportunity. James rented a small apartment in the South Side, hoping for a quiet, simple life after years of service. But even as he unpacked boxes and walked the busy streets, a part of him still moved like a soldier on duty. He woke up at 5 a.m., made his bed with military corners, and exercised before breakfast. Old habits didn't fade. They were part of who he was. He found purpose again at a local youth center. The building was small but filled with life. Laughter from children, the thump of basketballs, and the constant chatter of teenagers. James volunteered as a mentor, teaching discipline and teamwork to kids who struggled to find direction. They respected him, not because he was strict, but because he carried himself with quiet strength. When he spoke, people listened. Still, James could sense a tension in the neighborhood. There were whispers among the staff and kids about a local gang that had been spreading through the area. Graffiti started appearing on walls near the center. Cars were being broken into. One night, a window at the youth center was smashed. People were growing scared. James didn't like what he was seeing. He had seen fear before, not just on battlefields, but in communities torn apart by violence and hopelessness. And now he saw that same fear growing here. The police came sometimes, but they couldn't stay forever. James knew that. He believed that every neighborhood needed its own guardians, people who stood firm no matter what. One evening after closing the youth center, James was walking home under the streetlights. The city was quiet except for the hum of cars in the distance. He took his usual route, down a narrow side street that cut between old brick buildings. He had walked this way many times before, but tonight something felt different. The air was heavy, the silence uneasy. As he turned a corner, he heard shouting. Ahead, a small convenience store's door was open, and a man, the store owner, Mr. Patel, was being pushed against the wall by 3 young men. They were demanding money, waving sticks, and yelling threats. Mr. Patel's hands shook as he tried to explain that he had already paid what they wanted. James stopped at once. His instincts kicked in. His body moved before his mind caught up. He scanned the scene. The distance, the exits, the number of attackers. It was automatic, like training taking over. He could have walked away. It wasn't his business. But James had never been the kind of man who turned his back on someone in trouble. He remembered the oath he took long ago: to protect, to serve, to stand watch. That oath didn't end when his uniform came off. He stepped forward slowly, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough," he said. The gang members turned around. They were young, maybe in their 20s, wearing hoodies and masks that covered half their faces. One of them laughed. "Who are you supposed to be, old man?" James didn't answer. He just kept walking toward them, steady and fearless. His eyes locked on theirs, cold, focused, unwavering. It wasn't anger. It was control. His silence made them nervous. The tallest one stepped forward and shoved him. "You better walk away," the young man said. James didn't move. His voice was low but sharp. "I said, that's enough." Something about the way he said it, the command in his tone, the authority in his stance, broke the gang's rhythm. They hesitated. And in that small moment, James moved. He didn't fight like an ordinary man. Every move was fast, precise, and deliberate. When one swung a stick, James sidestepped, caught the attacker's wrist, and twisted, sending the stick clattering to the ground. Another lunged, but James swept his leg and sent him down. The third tried to run, but froze when James turned toward him with that same controlled focus. In less than a minute, it was over. The attackers stumbled away, one limping, another clutching his arm. They ran into the darkness, leaving Mr. Patel shaking but unharmed. James didn't chase them. He just picked up the dropped stick and set it aside. His breathing was steady, like nothing unusual had happened. Mr. Patel looked at him speechless. "You saved my life," he whispered. James shook his head. "Just helping out, sir." He stayed with the shopkeeper until the police arrived. He gave a clear report, no exaggeration, no drama. The officers thanked him. recognizing the discipline in his tone. But James didn't want praise. He just nodded, then walked home quietly, disappearing into the night. Back in his apartment, he sat down by the window and looked out at the street. The rain had started again, tapping softly on the glass. His mind went back to Arlington, the silence of the tomb, the rhythm of his watch, the endless march of duty. For years he had guarded the memory of soldiers who could no longer stand. Now he realized he was still guarding something, not a tomb, but the living spirit of decency and courage that he refused to let die. In the following days, word spread through the neighborhood. People talked about a quiet man who had stopped a robbery alone. The kids at the youth center asked him if it was true. He smiled but said little. He didn't want to be seen as a hero. He just wanted them to know that standing up for what's right was possible, but not everyone admired him. Somewhere in the darker corners of the neighborhood, the gang he had stopped was furious. They felt humiliated, defeated by one man. Rumors began to move quickly, carried from block to block. The South Iron Wolves, the gang behind most of the local trouble, now had a reason to come after James Rowland. He didn't know it yet, but his quiet stand that night had started something much bigger. It had set off a chain of events that would test everything he believed in: courage, honor, and duty. That night, as he turned off the lights and prepared for bed, he checked the locks on his doors. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. A soldier's instinct never really rests. He stood for a moment, looking at the small flag folded neatly on his shelf, a reminder of his service, and the promise he had made long ago. He whispered to himself, "You don't walk away from your post." Outside, the city was alive again. The rain stopped and a soft wind blew through the streets. Somewhere out there, trouble was growing, but James Rowland, the tomb guard who once stood watch over the unknown, was ready to stand watch again. The next few days after the incident were strangely quiet. The small convenience store where James had stepped in to help was back to normal, but the people in the neighborhood spoke about that night in low voices. Some called him a hero, others called him crazy for getting involved. James didn't care for either label. To him, what he had done wasn't about bravery or foolishness. It was just the right thing to do. He continued with his routine as if nothing had changed. He still opened the youth center every morning, still cleaned the gym, helped the kids with their lessons, and talked to them about life and respect. Yet, somewhere deep inside, he knew things were shifting. He noticed unfamiliar faces hanging around corners where the local kids used to play. He saw spray paint marks on the walls, not random graffiti, but the kind that meant territory. He didn't have to guess who was behind it. The South Iron Wolves had heard about what he did. The gang had roots in the area for years, and no one usually stood up to them. But now an outsider, a quiet ex-soldier, had humiliated some of their members. In their world, reputation was everything. One evening, as James was locking up the youth center, he heard a car engine idling nearby. A black sedan with tinted windows sat across the street. He watched it for a moment, feeling that old soldier's awareness rise. He could sense when he was being watched. Then the car slowly rolled away. The next morning, when he came back, the front door of the youth center had been spray-painted with the words, "Stay out, soldier." The kids looked scared. Some even said they didn't want to come to the center anymore. James looked at the message quietly, then took a bucket of paint and brushed it away himself. When one of the kids asked him why he wasn't scared, he smiled and said, "Fear only grows if you feed it." Still, he knew things were getting serious. He went to the local police station that afternoon and spoke with an officer named Sarah Torres. She had heard of him, the man who stopped the robbery. She listened carefully as James explained that the gang seemed to be following him now. "We'll keep an eye out," she said, "but these guys are unpredictable. If they come after you, call us immediately." James nodded. "I'll handle what I can. Just protect the kids." That night the rain returned, and soft at first, then heavier. The streets glistened under the streetlights. James left the center later than usual. As he turned onto the narrow road toward his apartment, he saw movement up ahead, 3 figures walking toward him slowly. Their faces were hidden under hoodies. He stopped walking, hands relaxed at his sides. His mind began working like a map, calculating distance, light, and escape routes. The figures came closer. One of them spoke, his voice full of anger. "You think you can mess with us and walk away?" James said nothing. The leader stepped closer, holding something in his hand. It wasn't a weapon, just a chain, but the threat was clear. "You made us look weak," the man continued. "Now everyone thinks the wolves are scared of one old guard." James looked straight at him. "You can still walk away," he said quietly. "You don't have to do this." But the men were not here to talk. One swung the chain. James ducked and stepped aside, moving faster than they expected. The chain missed and hit the ground with a metallic sound. The next one tried to tackle him, but James shifted his weight, letting the man stumble forward. A quick step and a firm hold. The attacker went down. The third hesitated. For a moment, he seemed unsure. James saw it, the doubt, the confusion. He didn't want to fight these young men. They were lost, not evil, but he couldn't let them hurt others. A sudden shout came from behind. Another man emerging from the shadows, larger than the rest. He charged toward James, but James sidestepped again and pushed him aside, using his opponent's strength against him. The man hit the wall and groaned, sliding to the ground. When the fight ended, James didn't run. He stood there, breathing steadily, waiting to see if they would get up again. But they didn't. One muttered something about payback coming soon. Then they disappeared into the rain. James walked home silently, his heart steady, but his thoughts racing. He knew this wasn't over. The gang wouldn't stop. They would regroup, and next time they might come with more people. He needed to prepare. The next day, he began observing more carefully. Every morning, he walked around the neighborhood before opening the youth center. He noticed where the gang members gathered, which corners they controlled, and what time they appeared. He made notes, not on paper, but in his memory. Every pattern, every sign. When Officer Torres visited the center later that week, he quietly shared what he'd learned. She was surprised by his level of detail. "You should have been a detective," she said. "I was trained to notice things," James replied. She promised to pass the information to the department's gang unit, but she warned him again not to get involved directly. "You've done your part. Let us handle it." James appreciated her concern, but he knew the truth. Police couldn't be everywhere. The community was scared, and people avoided talking to law enforcement out of fear. Someone had to keep eyes on the ground. That night, as he sat alone in his small apartment, he looked at the old box he kept from his army days. Inside were a few photographs, his medals, and a folded uniform. He ran his hand over the patches, the Tomb Guard emblem, the symbol of honor and silent duty. He remembered the endless hours of training, the unspoken promise never to break formation, never to fail in guarding something sacred. That same promise echoed now. Only this time he wasn't guarding a tomb. He was guarding lives, people who didn't even know someone was standing watch for them. A few days later, James noticed that more graffiti had appeared, this time closer to the youth center. But he also noticed something else. Some of the older kids he'd been mentoring were beginning to push back, painting over the gang signs, refusing to let their space be claimed. When he asked one of them, a boy named Malik, why they were doing it, the boy grinned. "Because you showed us how not to be scared." Those words hit James deeply. He hadn't planned to be anyone's example, but now he realized that his actions had given these young people a sense of courage. They were learning to take back their streets in small but powerful ways. Still, the danger wasn't gone. One night, James returned home to find his front door slightly open. He stopped immediately, listening. The apartment was dark and silent. His instincts told him what had happened. Someone had been inside. He slowly checked every room. Nothing seemed missing, but the message was clear. The gang was watching. He called Officer Torres and reported it. She arrived within minutes, her flashlight sweeping the hallway. "They're trying to scare you," she said. James nodded. "It's not working." She gave a small, uneasy smile. "Be careful, Mr. Rowland. These people don't like to be challenged." After she left, James stood by his window again, looking out at the city lights. He thought about all the times he had stood in silence at Arlington, guarding the unknowns, never flinching even when storms raged. That same silence now filled his apartment, a silence of purpose, not fear. He knew what was coming. The gang would try again, and next time it wouldn't be small. But James Rowland had made up his mind. He wouldn't let them take over the place where innocent kids played and families worked hard to live in peace. He whispered the same words he had said to himself so many times before, words that had carried him through battles and lonely watches. "Stay at your post." Outside, The rain began again, washing the streets of Chicago clean. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a reminder that the city never slept. And neither would James Rowland, the soldier who still stood guard even when no one was watching. Days passed, but the peace didn't last. The South Iron Wolves were not a gang that forgave easily. Word spread quickly through the streets that they were planning something big. People in the neighborhood began closing their shops earlier than usual. The laughter of children faded from the streets. Everyone felt the change, like the calm before a storm. James Rowland noticed it too. Every morning, during his walk to the youth center, he saw fewer faces. Even the older residents who used to sit on porches and talk now stayed indoors. The fear was growing again. It reminded him of war zones he had seen, when people could sense danger even before it arrived. But James didn't let it stop him. He still came to the youth center, still spoke to the kids, still kept his calm voice steady. To them, he was the one person who never showed fear, and that gave them strength. Inside, though, James was planning. He knew the wolves wouldn't just go away. They had already marked him as a problem, and in their world, problems were not ignored. One evening, after helping close the center, James met Officer Sarah Torres again. She had come to check on him. Her face looked worried. "We've picked up some talk," she said quietly. "The wolves are upset.
They think you made them look weak."
They might try something soon." James nodded, his expression calm. "Then we'll be ready," Torres sighed. "I know you can handle yourself, but please don't go after them alone. Let us do our job. I won't go after them," he said, "but I won't let them hurt anyone either." He meant it. That night, back at his apartment, James sat at his small kitchen table and drew a simple map of the neighborhood. He marked where he had seen the gang members, the alleys, the corners, the stores they used as meeting spots. His training taught him to think ahead. He wasn't planning to fight. He was preparing to protect. Over the next few days, he quietly gathered information. He spoke with shopkeepers, janitors, even bus drivers, people who noticed things others ignored. He didn't ask direct questions. He just listened. Every story helped him understand the wolves' pattern. He learned where they kept their stolen goods, where they hid when police cars passed, and how they used teenagers to deliver messages. At the same time, he worked closely with Officer Torres, giving her the details he discovered. She was amazed by his precision. "You're like a one-man intelligence unit," she said once. James gave a small smile. "Observation keeps you alive." While he was careful, the gang was watching too. They had eyes everywhere. A boy at the corner store told them that the soldier guy was asking too many questions. The wolves didn't like that. Their leader, a tall man named Rico, decided to make an example of him. One gray afternoon, when James left the youth center, he noticed a car following him. It stayed several blocks behind, moving slowly each time he turned a corner. He didn't panic. Instead, he adjusted his route, passing through well-lit streets and areas with security cameras. Eventually, the car drove off, but he knew what it meant. They were testing him. That night, he barely slept. He sat by his window, watching the city lights. In the distance, he could hear the faint sounds of music and cars. Chicago never truly slept, and neither did his mind. He thought of his days at Arlington, standing guard in silence. Back then, he had one simple duty: to protect the tomb no matter what. He realized now that this was no different. The setting had changed, but the mission was the same: to stand firm when others could not. 2 nights later, his prediction came true. The youth center was broken into. The staff arrived in the morning to find smashed windows and spray paint on the walls. The words were clear: "You can't protect them." James stood in front of the damage, jaw tight but eyes calm. The kids gathered around, whispering nervously. Some were scared, others angry. James looked at them and said, "This building stands because of what we do inside it, not what they paint on it. We'll fix it," and they did. Together, they cleaned the broken glass and repainted the walls. The act itself became a message. The community would not be bullied. But later that evening, as James walked home, he saw 2 men watching from across the street. They didn't speak, but their meaning was clear. This was personal now. James didn't take it lightly. He began adjusting his habits. He changed his routes, stayed alert, and avoided patterns. Every night before sleeping, he checked the windows and locks. He wasn't afraid, just aware. Awareness had saved his life before, and it would again. Meanwhile, Officer Torres and her team increased patrols in the area. They even caught 2 young men linked to the wolves and recovered stolen items from their car. It was a small victory, but it made Rico furious. The gang leader now saw James not just as a nuisance, but as a threat. The following week, James received an envelope under his door. Inside was a single photo, a picture of the youth center circled in red marker. There were no words, but the message was loud enough. He brought it straight to Torres. She looked at the photo and cursed softly under her breath. They're planning something. Probably trying to hit the center. James nodded. Then we'll make sure they fail. Together, they formed a quiet plan. The police couldn't guard the place every hour, but they could increase their presence. Torres also gave James her personal number. If anything happens, call me directly. Promise me that, he promised. On the outside, James seemed as calm as ever. But inside, he felt the weight of responsibility. He had grown close to the people at the center, especially the children who looked up to him. They saw him as a mentor, a protector. He couldn't let them down. That night, he stayed late at the youth center, going over every door and window. He noticed how easily someone could enter from the back alley. So, using his old army habits, he reinforced the weak spots, not with weapons, but with smart thinking. He added simple locks, used furniture to block blind corners, and set up a few old cameras Officer Torres had lent him. By midnight, everything was ready. He turned off the lights, sat in a chair by the main hall, and waited. Hours passed. The city outside was quiet. Rain began to fall again, soft at first. Then he heard it. Footsteps, faint and quick, near the back door. His eyes opened immediately. The sound of metal scraping followed. Someone was trying to break in. He moved silently, just like during his guard duty. His steps made no sound. Through the glass of the door, he saw 3 silhouettes, dark shapes moving cautiously. One of them pushed the door, testing it. Another whispered something. They thought the building was empty. James picked up his phone and sent one short message to Torres. They're here. Then he waited. He didn't rush out. Instead, he watched carefully as they forced the door open and stepped inside. They carried small bags and flashlights, searching for something. Maybe money, maybe just to destroy property. James spoke from the darkness. You should leave now. The men froze. The light from their flashlights swung around, landing on him. He stood straight, calm and unmoving, his voice steady. Walk away, he said again. But they didn't. One of them shouted, and the others moved toward him. In that instant, James acted, fast, precise, and controlled. He used the shadows to his advantage, staying out of reach while keeping them confused. They swung wildly, missing every time. His movements were efficient, a step, a shift, a grip, and one attacker was on the ground. Another stumbled back, tripping over a chair. Before they could regroup, flashing blue lights filled the windows. Officer Torres and her team arrived, sirens cutting through the rain. The intruders froze, realizing it was over. Within minutes, the police had them in custody. Torres walked up to James, shaking her head in disbelief. You really don't know how to stay out of trouble, do you? She said. James gave a faint smile. Just doing my duty. As the officers led the men away, the rain began to slow. The youth center stood quiet again, unharmed. Torres looked at him seriously. You made them angry, James. They'll come harder next time. He nodded. Then I'll be ready, she sighed. You can't guard the whole city alone. James looked out the window at the dark streets and answered softly. No, but I can guard my post. The night ended with the sound of police cars fading into the distance. The storm had only begun, but James Rowland, the soldier who never abandoned his duty, was ready for whatever came next. The days following the break-in were tense. James Rowland knew that the wolves were not finished. The youth center had survived this time, but the gang's anger was only growing. Every morning, James walked the streets with the same careful attention he had always shown, watching for unfamiliar faces, listening to the sounds of the city, and noticing the smallest details that others would miss. Every shadow, every movement was a potential warning. He spent hours reviewing the layout of the neighborhood in his mind, recalling the locations of alleys, side streets, and back entrances. His apartment and the youth center were no longer just places where he lived and worked. They were strategic posts, important to protect. He thought about the gang, how they moved, where they gathered, and what they wanted. They weren't thinking logically. They were driven by anger and pride. He had to outthink them, just as he had done with enemy soldiers years ago. Officer Torres checked in regularly. "James, we can't keep up this level of patrol forever," she warned. "We need a plan that will stop them for good." James nodded. He didn't want to rely only on the police. He needed a strategy that would work no matter what. He spent his evenings at the youth center, reinforcing weak spots, marking escape routes, and thinking through every possible scenario. He even set up small traps, not dangerous but clever ways to slow intruders down or catch them in the act. It reminded him of training in the army, when he had to anticipate enemy movements before they happened. One night, as he sat at a corner of the center, he noticed a group of young men lingering on the street outside. Their posture was casual, but James recognized the tension. They were watching, waiting for the right moment. He knew that this wasn't a small test. It was a signal that the gang was planning to act soon. James called Officer Torres. "They're out front. 3 of them watching," he said calmly. "Stay where you are." "Don't engage yet," she replied. James waited, silently observing. He watched as the men whispered to each other and moved closer to the building. Then he noticed something unexpected. They were being careful, almost hesitant. They didn't want a direct fight. That gave James an idea. He prepared the inside of the youth center. Chairs, tables, and other objects were arranged to create narrow paths, slowing anyone who tried to enter quickly. He moved silently from one position to another, using shadows and corners to his advantage. His goal wasn't to hurt anyone, but to control the space and protect those inside. Minutes later, the gang struck. 3 masked men tried to enter through the back door, testing it first. James had anticipated this. He silently blocked the path, surprising them. They stumbled off balance, and James used their own momentum to push one into a chair. The others hesitated, unsure what was happening. Officer Torres's team arrived almost at the same time, sirens wailing softly. The gang's confidence faltered. James remained calm, moving with precision. He guided the intruders toward the center of the building where escape was limited. He stayed nonviolent but effective, using careful grips and holds to control movement. The gang tried to regroup, but every time they moved, James was one step ahead. He had studied their patterns, anticipated their reactions, and now he was executing a plan that ensured nobody inside was hurt. Within minutes, all 3 were contained, and the police moved in to take over. As the officers led the gang members away, James stepped outside. Rain had begun to fall lightly, washing away the tension from the streets. Officer Torres approached him, shaking her head in disbelief. "I can't believe you did all of this alone, James. You're incredible." He smiled faintly. "It's not about me. It's about protecting the people who need it." The youth center had survived another attack. Inside, the children and staff looked at James with awe. They had seen fear and chaos, but James had stood firm, calm, and in control. To them, he was not just a mentor or a volunteer. He was a protector, someone who would face danger without hesitation. Over the next few days, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The children laughed again, playing basketball in the center's yard. Shopkeepers reopened their stores. But James knew this calm was temporary. The wolves were angry, humiliated, and now determined to strike in a larger way. He continued his preparations. Every evening he walked the perimeter of the youth center, checking for weak points. He coordinated with Officer Torres, providing updates on suspicious activity. He trained the older children in small ways, teaching them how to stay safe, be aware of their surroundings, and avoid dangerous areas. He was creating a network of protection, just like he had in the army, but this time it was for his community. One morning, as James opened the youth center, he noticed a figure lurking across the street. A tall young man, familiar but new, was watching the building intently. James studied him quietly. This was no ordinary gang member. He was skilled, careful, and patient, the kind of person who planned every move. James realized that the next confrontation would be bigger than before. He returned home that night thinking about strategy. He reviewed his observations, checked the security cameras, and planned contingencies for every possible scenario. He was meticulous, considering every angle, every exit, and every potential threat. His experience as a tomb guard had taught him patience, discipline, and attention to detail, skills that were proving invaluable now. Then, a few nights later, the final confrontation arrived. The wolves had decided to take over the community center completely. They gathered a larger group, armed with makeshift tools and ready to intimidate. But James was ready. He had prepared the building, informed Officer Torres, and coordinated with nearby residents to watch for unusual activity. When the gang arrived, they were met with a calm but confident figure at the door. James stood straight, eyes sharp, his presence commanding. The gang hesitated, surprised to see one man so resolute. James didn't speak at first, he simply watched, his movements controlled, his mind analyzing their every action. As the first attacker tried to push forward, James sidestepped and gently but firmly redirected him toward a corner where movement was restricted. Another tried to grab a nearby table to swing at him, but James was already there, blocking, redirecting, and maintaining control without causing harm. The gang became frustrated. They shouted, they moved faster, but every time James anticipated their actions. His strategy was precise, non-violent, and effective. He was like a chess player, moving pieces in a way that controlled the outcome without unnecessary harm. Officer Torres and her team arrived moments later, guided by James's instructions. With the police entering from the side and James controlling the main hall, the gang found themselves trapped. There was nowhere to go, no way to regain control. One by one, they were contained and arrested. When it was over, James stepped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the street shiny and reflective. The youth center was unharmed. The children and staff looked at him with admiration and gratitude. James nodded quietly, feeling the same calm satisfaction he had felt after completing a successful watch at Arlington. Officer Torres approached, smiling. "You've done it, James. You've protected the center, the kids, and the neighborhood. You've done more than anyone could have imagined." James shook his head. "I just did what I had to do. Duty doesn't end because the uniform comes off." The news spread quickly. People called him a hero, a protector, a soldier who had stood watch over the living just as he had once stood watch over the unknown. But James didn't see it that way. To him, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about fulfilling his promise to himself and to the people who depended on him. As he walked home that night, James thought about the city. Chicago was alive, vibrant, and sometimes dangerous, but he also realized something important. No matter how big or strong the challenge, a single person with discipline, courage, and planning could make a difference. He had done it once, and he could do it again if necessary. Inside his apartment, he sat quietly, reflecting on the events. The final showdown had tested his patience, his training, and his courage. It had shown him that protecting others required more than strength. It required careful thought, planning, and the willingness to act decisively when the moment came. And in the quiet of his apartment, James whispered to himself, as he always did, "Stay at your post." Outside, the city lights twinkled, and life slowly returned to the neighborhood. But one thing was certain. James Rowland, the tomb guard who never abandoned his duty, would always be watching, always prepared, always standing firm. The neighborhood slowly began to breathe again. Life returned to the streets, the children laughed in the playground, and shopkeepers reopened their stores with cautious smiles. But even as the city seemed to calm, James Rowland knew that vigilance never ended. The wolves had been defeated for now, but danger could always return. Experience had taught him that peace was fragile, and a good guardian always stayed alert. Every morning, James walked the same route to the youth center. The rhythm of his steps, the careful observation of his surroundings had become second nature. He noticed the small things. A car parked longer than usual, a stranger lingering by the corner, a piece of trash out of place. These were the clues that kept the neighborhood safe. He had learned that being alert wasn't about fear, but about responsibility. At the youth center, the atmosphere had changed. The children, once timid and wary, now carried themselves with a quiet confidence. They trusted James, but more importantly, they had begun to trust themselves. The older kids helped clean the playground, painted over old graffiti, and even coached younger children in sports. James watched from the side, proud but humble. He didn't need praise. The community's resilience was reward enough. Officer Torres visited the center regularly, always offering quiet encouragement. "You've made a real difference here, James. These kids, this neighborhood, they'll remember what you've done." James nodded, smiling faintly. "I didn't do it for them to remember me. I did it because it was right." But even as peace settled over the area, James remained cautious. He reviewed the layout of the neighborhood in his mind daily. just as he had during the gang confrontations. He checked the youth center's doors, locks, and windows, ensuring everything was secure. Every detail mattered. He wanted the kids to have a safe place to grow, learn, and play without fear. Then came the community meeting. The residents had gathered to discuss ways to improve their neighborhood and prevent future trouble. James attended quietly, letting others speak, offering suggestions only when necessary. He emphasized awareness and cooperation, simple steps that could keep everyone safe. He encouraged the adults to watch over children, report suspicious activity, and stand united. His words were calm, measured, but they carried authority. People listened because they knew he had acted when others were afraid. During the meeting, a woman named Mrs. Davis, who ran a small corner store, approached him. "James," she said, "I don't know what we would have done without you. You didn't just stop the gang. You gave us hope." James shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. Everyone here played a part. You watched, you spoke up, and you stayed together. That's what mattered." The community began to see a new pattern. Fear no longer dictated their lives. They had someone who had shown them that courage and careful planning could overcome even the toughest challenges. Slowly, smiles returned to faces, and the streets echoed with life again. One evening, as James was walking home from the center, he noticed a young boy struggling to carry a stack of books. Without thinking, he stepped forward to help. The boy looked up, surprised. "Thank you, sir," he said. James smiled. "You're welcome. Always help others when you can. That's how we make our community stronger." The small act reminded him why he had stayed in Chicago. It wasn't just about fighting gangs or preventing trouble. It was about being part of something bigger, about creating a neighborhood where children could grow safely and people could live without constant fear. Months passed, and the wolves faded from the streets. Their power diminished, their influence broken. The youth center became a symbol of resilience, and James remained a silent guardian. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't need it. His satisfaction came from knowing the streets were safer, that children laughed without worry, and that families could walk without fear. One morning, as he walked past the center, he noticed a group of children playing basketball. One of them bounced the ball with confidence, looking up and smiling. James felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that in protecting the neighborhood, he had also protected the future, the hopes and dreams of these young people. Later that day, Officer Torres came by. She handed him a small plaque engraved simply, "To James Rowland, whose courage and dedication protect our community." James looked at it quietly. He didn't say much, only nodding. The plaque wasn't about fame. It was about acknowledgement, a sign that the neighborhood had noticed his efforts and appreciated them. For him, that was enough. James continued his routine, but with a new sense of calm. The streets were no longer tense, the children no longer fearful, and the community no longer isolated. He still watched, still walked the streets with careful attention, but the tension had eased. The job of protecting was no longer a battle every day. It was a steady watch, a commitment to ensure that peace lasted. At night, he sometimes thought back to Arlington, to the silent watch at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The principles were the same: discipline, vigilance, and dedication. Only now, instead of guarding the memory of the past, he was guarding the lives of the present. The same quiet strength, the same steady heart applied in a different place. The youth center organized a small celebration to honor community members who had helped restore safety. Children performed plays, shared drawings, and spoke about how they felt safer now. James watched from the back, standing quietly. No one knew he had been the one who stopped the wolves, but that wasn't important. The smiles, the laughter, the sense of unity, that was the reward. One boy, Malik, approached him shyly and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up. Brave but smart." James knelt to the boy's level and smiled. "You already have the courage inside you? Just remember to always think before you act, and never turn away when someone needs help." In the following weeks, James continued mentoring, teaching, and guiding. The community center thrived, the streets were safer, and the people were stronger. He remained a quiet presence, watching and protecting, always ready if danger returned. One evening, as he returned home, he stood by his window and looked out at the city lights. Chicago was alive, vibrant, and full of challenges, but he felt peace. He realized that one person, acting with discipline, courage, and care, could indeed make a difference. He whispered the words he had repeated so many times throughout his life. Stay at your post. The city carried on below him, unaware of the quiet guardian watching over it. James Rowland, the tomb guard who had taken his training, discipline, and honor from Arlington and applied it to protect the living, knew that his watch would continue. Not because he sought glory, but because duty and care were stronger than fear. In the end, the wolves had been stopped, the neighborhood restored, and the children safe. James never sought recognition, but he had left an unshakable mark. The community learned that courage and vigilance could overcome fear, and they had seen it in action. Even after the news of the confrontation faded from headlines, his story remained in the hearts of the people he protected. He had shown them that one person could stand firm, that discipline and courage mattered, and that protecting others was a noble duty worth every effort. James returned to his quiet apartment, closing the door behind him. He looked at the flag folded neatly on his shelf, a reminder of his past service and the values he carried forward. The streets of Chicago were far from the marble paths of Arlington, but the mission was the same: to watch, to protect, and to serve. And in the stillness of the night, James Rowland, the soldier who never abandoned his post, kept watch, a quiet guardian in a world that often forgot the value of steadfast courage.